Good evening and welcome to Hardfire. I'm your host, Joseph Dobrian, and tonight we are going to be covering a subject that is very near and dear to libertarian hearts, and that is the subject of public improvements. Should we have any? Who should pay for them? How much should the government be involved, if at all? Is it the government's job to make public improvements? With me tonight to discuss that are MARNIE MCGREGOR, Director of Move New York and New Jersey, which is a coalition to promote the creation of a tunnel across the Great Gulf between New York and New Jersey. And on my right is Professor Charles Evans, Professor Emeritus from the Philosophy Department of, well, it was then City College of New York. Now, we'll start with you, Ms. McGregor. Perhaps you can explain to us what exactly your objective is. What sort of a tunnel is this that you're trying to build?
Sure, thanks for having me. And the Cross Harbor Rail Freight Tunnel project is a project that's been around for 26 years. In fact, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey was originally created to build a tunnel to connect the east and west of Hudson regions. And so this is over 84 years old, this concept. And essentially what it is a way to connect New York and Long Island and the whole of east of Hudson to the nation's rail freight network. And it is a 5.5-mile tunnel underneath the Hudson River that would run from New Jersey, Bayonne area, Jersey City area, to Bay Ridge, Sunset Park, 65th Street in Brooklyn, and then connect to the existing rail freight network which exists through Brooklyn and Queens, and essentially deliver a significant portion of our goods that we all need every day, and as a result take trucks off the roads in order to deliver those goods. So that's essentially the project that this coalition has come to support and rally around. Okay,
well now the concept as such doesn't sound too bad to me, but Dr. Evans, you're opposed to it. Why?
Yes, well, I think that when you get to the details, you'll find serious disadvantages. For example, well, let me mention the major advantages people attribute to this program. The most fervent defenders I know have said it will take many trucks off the road. This will ease up traffic in New York. When it takes trucks off the road, it will improve the air quality of the city, and furthermore, it will create many, many jobs.
Well, now you're stating her case. I want to hear yours.
Well, my case is that these advantages are non-existent when all is said and done, and that this would be a major boondoggle to finance such a project, which I believe would cost us over $10 million ultimately if it were to go through. It would also...
Don't you mean 10 billion?
Billion, yes. I'm sorry, did I say million? Yeah. Well, you know.
You know, it's like Everett Dirksen said, billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Yes.
Well, now, Ms. McGregor, maybe you could enlighten us as to how much the project will cost and who's going to pay for it.
The current estimates in this project, I just want to be clear, is a long-term project, and it still has been studied for over 10 years, but the current proposal as it stands could run from between $4 billion and $7 billion, and that is proposed to include approximately $2 billion of that would be for the tunnel itself. The rest of it is related to upgrading the existing rail freight infrastructure because we're looking at double stack and needing to do bridge clearances and lowering some of the tracks, all of these improvements that would be necessary.
And where does the money come from?
Well, the current proposal, the current funding that has been achieved for studying the project has come from the federal government. The City of New York Economic Development Corporation has been the project sponsor. Former Mayor Giuliani was very supportive of this project and still is. So the current funding we actually just received in the last federal transportation bill, $100 million from federal money, and the allocation, the formula that it is 80% federal funds and a 20% local match. So going forward into the construction, the next transportation bill in 2009, we would consider hopefully some sort of federal contribution, because as we know, New York certainly doesn't get the same a fair share of its taxes that we all pay coming back from Washington. So we see this as a significant investment from the federal government in a project that they have deemed a project of regional and national significance.
Okay, well that may be and it may be not, but do you have any figures as to exactly how this project would benefit, well, society in general in the long run?
Absolutely. We see the project as in the current form, that it has been studied. Over 1 million trucks would be taken off of New York City streets each year. And that we see as a significant contribution. Over 21,000 tons of greenhouse gas per year would be removed from the air. And that obviously we see significantly high asthma rates, some of the highest asthma rates in the nation in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and we see that could do nothing but help those asthma rates. And we have the truck reduction is just one component. The other component is economic development. And for Brooklyn alone, this project could potentially generate 8,000 long-term jobs, and we consider those very good jobs.
What kind of jobs?
The jobs there's construction jobs obviously, but those are actually a small portion. We've got freight-related jobs, which would be some of the warehousing and loading and unloading. So there are a variety of jobs, and then there's the whole job creation around the time saved of people traveling, that the spin-off effect for businesses and the cost savings. So there's direct and indirect economic benefits.
Okay, so Ms. McGregor says that this project is going to create jobs. It'll possibly improve general health conditions, and might save everybody a little time and effort. You, on the other hand, you say it's a boondoggle.
Yes, well, first of all, I would just ignore the issue of job creation, because if you really want to create jobs, you just raise all the buildings in New York City, and that will create loads of jobs. So you have to consider the merits of a project quite independent of the issue of job creation. So getting to the issue of removing traffic, removing trucks, well, first of all, it's not quite clear that that many trucks will even use this tunnel. And in fact, there is an example of a world character, namely the Channel, which goes from England to France, and that has not led to any of the significant expectations of removing alternate means of transportation. And the nature of transporting freight by rail assumes an economy that requires a certain type of product to be moved. And most of the products which are needed in the New York metropolitan area are not that type. So, in fact, if anything, there'll be some use of such a tunnel, but then this will free up the bridges, the other tunnels for traffic. So there's not very great likelihood that traffic will decrease. Furthermore, the facility that will be created in Maspeth, Queens, will involve shipping goods from that area all throughout the city. So you'll have a different form of truck traffic presenting this freight to various parts of the city.
Well, now, setting aside the question of which of you is right on this point, for all I know, you may both be wrong. Let's just talk a little about how it's going to get done. You seem to indicate that it's going to be done 80% from federal funding, at least the first phase, and 20% from local and state funding, but it's all pretty much financed by one government or another. Have you considered engaging in such a project entirely via the private sector?
Well, actually, in terms of as I said, the studying, the design and engineering, which is the current phase that we received $100 million of federal funding, the 80% component, but the actual operation of the tunnel would significantly rely on private fees, a fee structure, and the financing has not yet been finalized. But the economic analysis is indicating that shippers would in fact pay a certain fee to be able to move their goods by rail because of the premium that they currently pay with their trucks being congested in New York traffic, so to get into the New York market. So there certainly would be a private sector component as well as the potential to bond off of those fees. So there are private sector components, and certainly not the infrastructure. I think we see the federal government.
Well, I'm talking about the infrastructure.
Yes.
Why couldn't that be done by the private sector, in your opinion? Or could it?
I think that it could be. I think that hasn't been studied.
Have you explored it?
We have not explored that,
Why
but
not?
it has been explored. It has been, and it is being explored as an option. For the current funding, the federal government determined that this was a significant project. They classified it as a project of regional and national significance, and they deemed it received the most funds of any transportation project in New York. So for the next phase, we certainly are investigating the potential for private sector funding.
Dr. Evans, would you be less opposed to this project if it were entirely privately funded?
No, I don't think so, but I think that's so utopian. I mean, there's no concerted interest in any group of shippers, merchants, what have you, who would shell out that much money. And
you
in
know,
fact,
Dr. Evans, it's people like you who get in the way of libertarian progress.
Yeah.
We don't know till we've tried, do we?
well, okay, I mean, I recommend it as a program in your platform. So, you know, that, I would look with great support for that, because I would regard it as a sure way of undermining the whole program. But okay, that's a minor issue. But look, there will be a toll, and in fact, one thing that will affect everyone in New York who travels to New Jersey will have their tolls increased, because to finance the upkeep of this project, it will not be sufficient to just collect tolls from the freight that is shipped. And if anything, you know, if you raise the tolls too much, people will simply not use that, because it's still economically more reasonable to ship things by truck.
Okay. Now, here's something that I'm curious about, and you can answer it in turn if you like. If it's going to be a government-sponsored product, how do you know that it's going to be done in the most cost-effective way if you've only got government participation?
Yeah.
If you had, seems to me that if you had competitive bidding by the private sector, you would have people bidding on this project who were concerned about things like insurance, about sound quality, just generally less concerned with making sure that it makes money for their congressional district, and more concerned with having a quality product. Did that occur to your coalition at all?
Well, we are in fact working, in the private sector consultants that have been working on the environmental impact statement, studying the project for the last 6 years, would in fact be the private companies bidding on some of the engineering and design and development. So they certainly have, I certainly see a competitive process, and the government down payment, if you will, I think is a reflection of the public interest, whereas the actual building and operating would be, I think, a fair and healthy competition for a private sector.
Okay. At this point, let's just take a very quick break, and let me fill you in on what's going on with the Libertarian Party these days. Now, the Libertarian Party's main objection to a project like this is simply that it's funded and driven by the government. And that is the question that has plagued our society for a very long time. What's the role of government? What's the proper role of government? How big should it be? What should it be concerned with? And if you want to know more about the Libertarian Party's stand on that issue and a host of other issues, then I suggest you visit our website, www.manhattanlp.org. That's the website of the Manhattan Libertarian Party, and there you will be acquainted with not only our positions on the issues, but also with the various people who are running for public office in New York City this year. We've got a very fine, very strong candidate for mayor, Audrey Silk, and she's supported by a cast of equally glamorous and effective candidates for the other offices. Once again, that's www.manhattanlp.org. And now back to the fray. Since I'm mentioning the Libertarian Party here, Libertarians generally believe that government should be as strictly limited as possible, and it should be limited generally to national defense, to law enforcement, and to protecting people's rights to govern themselves. And other than that, zip. So if I come to you saying I'm that kind of a person with that kind of belief, how would you persuade me that a project like this could be justified under libertarian principles?
Well, I think the question I would ask is, with growing, and we all hope, I think, from any political stripe, we would hope that the economy would continue growing. It's anticipated that the shipment of goods to this region to sustain and improve our economy would increase over the next 25 years, 80%. So the question really is, how do we all envision the quality of life in our region given an increase in goods being moved around? Trucks certainly are the main way of getting goods around, but that isn't working. We see that is just simply deteriorating the quality of life, which is why you're seeing these communities up in arms around some of these proposals because of that truck traffic issue. So I think the question is, what role do neighborhoods and citizens play in advocating for projects that will improve their quality of life by taking trucks off the road? And that's the way we see this project. You know, we certainly see it as a public interest. Our position is that there is a role for the government, but the general concept is we want to improve the lives of local residents in their communities. So I'm not sure what the libertarian position would be on how to solve the truck traffic problem growing in the future, but we certainly see this as a solution.
Okay. Dr. Evans, your background is philosophical rather than urban planning or engineering. So can you tell me from a philosophical standpoint why you oppose this particular plan?
Well, I think it's common sense rather than some very deep philosophical concern. And I mean, I do go part of the way with you. That is, I do think that when government does get involved in economic affairs, it shouldn't just be considerations of some vague utility that a program will have. I mean, you have to consider the negative consequences too. And for example, one major facet of this program is that it will actually put over 50 businesses out of business in Queens alone. And it's very ill thought of, even from the perspective of those who are interested in social planning. For example, the Port of New York Authority has now, in effect, washed its hands of this project because their concerns are such that what they will have to shell out if they become the party that runs the construction will create havoc for their budget, and this will have a very severe negative effect on our infrastructure in New York City. It will also create havoc in neighborhoods where you'll have noise, filth carried on
during the
for
construction
years.
process, I suppose.
For years, it will excite vermin, which is
Okay.
always
Fine, but riddle me this, either of you. I say, it sounds to me like maybe it could work. I don't know. It sounds feasible. It sounds like it might be a good idea. But I'm saying, wait a minute. How about the people whose property you take under eminent domain in order to get this thing built? How about the people who are forced to pay for it via taxes, higher tolls, what have you, who didn't have really any say in whether it was built and may not have approved of it? How is that justified morally?
Well, first of all, to be clear, the current proposal doesn't have any residential property being taken over by eminent domain. The businesses that you referred to in the Queens area would be for the current 108-acre intermodal facility in the West Maspeth area of Queens. Between 46 and 52 businesses would be, in fact, relocated, displaced. But as we see it, and again, the current design has not yet been determined, the size of it has not yet been determined, so there could be fewer businesses, but we see that area as becoming a potential location for these businesses to remain, not at that exact site, but that area we see as very important. So I think the issue, just to be clear on eminent domain, but from a moral issue, we really believe that this is a project that will benefit everyone in the region, and it's a question of visioning the future of the region. And yes, some of the details have to be worked out, but we see it as a project that everyone should be, in principle, behind.
Well, I find that a kind of elitist attitude of the worst sort, namely to somehow be quite sure that one invests this enormous funding, enormous labor, enormous thought in a program whose consequences are not all that clear. I mean, it seems to me government is most justified in entering into our lives when there are serious problems, and you know, if the chances of the project are such that they will create more havoc than they will help, I mean, it's, it's very risky.
Okay, but Doctor, supposing that I personally had $10 billion to spend any way I please, and I went and I bought the property in Brooklyn and the property in New Jersey, and I paid for the whole infrastructure, the digging, the everything, and then I recouped my investment by charging user fees, for example.
That wouldn't bother me.
That wouldn't bother you?
No, no. I mean, unless there's some significant, health hazard. Now, for example, one feature of this project, which people don't like to mention, is that when these trains come back from Queens, go to Jersey, they have to, the cost of shipment has to be paid for. And what do you think will be there? Terrible materials, waste, products of the worst sort, hazardous materials, and it seems to me no one has really fully dealt with the possible dangers of that. So even if this were a purely private project, there might be some considerations of general public health, which I mean, I think some libertarians might say might be justified.
Well, some would and some wouldn't. But,
yes,
Ms. McGregor, did anybody in your coalition ever look around for somebody who might be interested in investing in a good chunk of the infrastructure in the hopes of recouping his investment later on? Was that did anybody even think of that? Did anybody talk about asking around that way?
Yes, and those conversations are still ongoing. I think what we've seen is that it is something that has been studied. It's the most studied transportation project in the New York region. A lot of the other projects are pivotal and important as well for transit and commuters. Freight, unfortunately, doesn't vote, so we don't necessarily see... And this project
would be strictly for freight, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the one project that attempts to take trucks off the road and deal with the problem, which I think government should have a role in considering the future health and welfare of the region. I don't necessarily know who else is looking at solutions to deal with the congestion issue. Transit advocates are working on commuter issues, and that's critical as well. But we are investigating opportunities with the private sector and the cost-benefit ratio is 2 to 1, and that is higher than any other project that's been looked at. So for every dollar you spend, you're getting $2 back in public benefits. So those are all considerations that...
What about the various sanitary issues that Dr. Evans was bringing up, such as waste disposal, arousal of vermin, and so forth? Some of those sounded more meritorious than others.
Well, there has been a concern in some communities with the tunnel being used for municipal solid waste and other materials, and what we we currently are aware that the mayor has a waste management plan, and that does not include, and the studies that have been done on this project do not include municipal solid waste. This financing analysis did not include municipal solid waste as a product to be taken through the tunnel. But the other side of it, which I certainly think is critical to consider, are the trucks that are currently driving along neighborhood streets with trash, and there's certainly a safety issue there to be considered. So those issues are obviously to be determined, and I think we don't have any intention, as far as we know, to include that as part of the goods that are being shipped.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so Dr. Evans, tell me fairly quickly, if you can, what could Ms. McGregor say that would make you more in favor of this project, that might change your mind or at least make you think twice?
Well, she could change her mind.
No.
I really find that there has to be an adequate analysis of the consequences of the situation. And in fact, the situation we have now is where the attempt to have a more careful analysis of the environmental impact has now been canceled altogether. And one aspect of the whole situation is that the whole idea has really been kept relatively secret from the community as a whole. And I find that very offensive.
Well, it's true that I have not heard much about it. Just how close are we, Ms. McGregor? We only have a few seconds, so sum it up quick.
Well, optimistically, we'd like to see a shovel in the ground in the next 5 years, but what Mr. Evans was referring to is that there is an extensive community outreach process that needs to be undertaken, and we are committed as a coalition to be doing that work. Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to have to wrap it up. Thank you both very much for showing up tonight. MARNIE McGregor, Charles Evans, thank you both. And tune in next week for another edition of Hardfire. I'm Joseph Dobrian. Thank you all.